What if the mega projects changing the world forever are also the ones quietly deciding what gets easier, what gets riskier, and what becomes impossible for everyone else? So before we admire the spectacle, we need to slow down and ask what these machines of scale are really built to solve, and what they quietly demand in return. The first surprise comes from Baihetan Hydropower Station, where a river that refuses to behave is forced into order, turning raw danger into steady reliability, like pressure converted into control. Then the scale shifts to Tropical Islands Resort, where weather becomes a setting, an indoor world engineered to cancel winter, hold comfort in place, and make nature feel negotiable. And the boundary moves again at the Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge, where a landscape designed to delay you becomes a straight line, one audacious crossing that collapses distance and changes what far even means. So how do projects like these stay stable when water, wind, and time never stop pushing back? And when the impossible becomes routine, what does it change in how we measure cost, safety, and human scale? Stay with us as we unpack the mechanisms, the trade-offs, and the real impact behind Earth's impossible wonders, so you can see how the world is being redesigned in plain sight. Baihetan Hydropower Station. What does it take to take a wild, seasonal river and make it deliver the same kind of dependable output as a machine, day after day, even when conditions refuse to stay calm? Baihetan Hydropower Station was built on the Jinsha River in southwest China to convert variable flow into controlled output, treating water as something that can be scheduled rather than merely endured. At this scale, the headline capacity, about 16 gigawatts, is not just a record. It is a promise of stable electricity that can relieve pressure on a grid that never fully rests. The core logic is regulation. Store water when conditions are high, release it when demand rises, and shape extremes into something operators can manage with rules instead of panic. At roughly 289 meters tall, the dam exists because reliability in a deep canyon requires mass and long-term stability, not short-term fixes. From the outside, it reads as a single wall, but in practice, it behaves like a coordinated system. Monitoring, dispatch decisions, maintenance routines, and contingency planning that keep performance consistent over time. That consistency is what makes life easier elsewhere, because cities and networks can plan around power that arrives on schedule, instead of power that arrives when nature allows. But the same control that benefits distant users also concentrates responsibility, because ecological change, altered river behavior, and social disruption become part of the project's permanent operating reality. This is where the project quietly asks for its price: continuous oversight, continuous upkeep, and acceptance that infrastructure at this scale always redistributes risk and dependence. Baihetan stands as an impossible project achievement because it converts a powerful river into reliable, large-scale infrastructure, making control and continuity routine while demanding the long-term discipline and trade-offs that only megaprojects of this magnitude can carry. Tropical Islands Resort. What does it take to engineer summer under one roof, so convincingly that winter outside stops mattering, even when weather, crowds, and machinery never stop pushing back? Tropical Islands Resort in Brandenburg, Germany takes that challenge seriously by living inside a former airship hangar originally built for cargo lifter, turning a failed industrial dream into a working climate machine. The hall is so oversized that official descriptions cite it at 360 meters long, which is why the project can stage an indoor world at the scale of real landscape rather than themed decor. Instead of building outward across scarce land, the decision here is to seal volume first, then manage the environment inside it: air, moisture, water quality, and safety, like a utility. That is how weather becomes a setting, not something guests endure, but something operators hold in place through continuous control systems running behind the scenes. The experience feels effortless: warm air, calm water, dense planting, and wide interior horizons. But the effort is constant because every hour depends on filtration, ventilation, corrosion management, and disciplined maintenance. Even movement becomes part of the engineering, since crowd flow, access, and emergency readiness have to function smoothly in a space that behaves more like a small indoor district than a simple attraction. The story also carries a quiet trade-off built into the concept. Comfort at this scale is never free, and the ongoing bill is energy, upkeep, and the operational expertise required to keep the illusion stable. Opened on December 19, 2004, the resort shows how infrastructure can be repurposed into year-round economic activity by making climate predictable where nature refuses to cooperate. Tropical Island stands as a mega-project achievement because it makes comfort and seasonality negotiable, but only by committing to the continuous, invisible work that keeps an engineered world from slipping back into real weather. Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge. When a deep canyon turns a short crossing into a 2-hour grind, what does it take to compress it into minutes without letting height and wind become the new danger? China's Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge in Guizhou answers that problem by carrying an expressway straight across the Huajiang Canyon over the Beipan River, replacing winding mountain detours with one controlled span. With the deck sitting about 625 meters above the gorge, the landscape stops being scenery and becomes the governing load case the structure must survive every day. A suspension configuration makes that possible by pushing the main forces into cables and anchors, so the roadway can live in open air while the structure stays stable under constant stress. At this height, the real engineering achievement is not the photo, but the behavior, wind response, vibration control, and the ability to verify performance continuously rather than trust it blindly. Project descriptions note built-in monitoring measures, reflecting the basic truth of megaproject bridges. Long-term reliability is an operating system, not a one-time opening. The payoff is precisely what the hook promises. Official reporting says the crossing time dropped from about 2 hours to about 2 minutes, turning distance into routine access for people and freight. Coverage also frames it as more than transport, with tourism and regional development riding on the same structure, which raises the pressure to keep safety and maintenance discipline as visible as the landmark itself. Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge stands as an impossible project because it makes extreme terrain feel operationally simple, while proving that only rigorous, long-horizon upkeep can keep a record-scale shortcut trustworthy. SoFi Stadium. What does it take to build a stadium so large it behaves like a working district, while still running safely, predictably, and on schedule when the city is at full volume? SoFi Stadium began as the anchor of the Hollywood Park redevelopment, so construction was never just a building. It was a new piece of urban infrastructure taking shape around it. The build focused on creating a protected, below-grade bowl and then finishing the sky, using a vast canopy to define the stadium's identity before the experience inside was even complete. That canopy, built with translucent ETFE, lets the venue feel open while still controlling comfort and operations, which is why it reads less like a dome and more like engineered atmosphere. As the structure rose, the real complexity became coordination, site logistics, sequencing, and quality control that have to work day after day because a project of this scale cannot be fixed later without massive disruption. The stadium reached completion and officially opened in September 2020, arriving as a finished system rather than a soft launch. It then entered operation during the pandemic era, when early games and events were shaped by restrictions, proving that a venue's first test is often operational resilience, not architecture. From there, the building's purpose became clear. It is designed to host continuous, high-intensity programming, sports, concerts, and large-scale productions, without the site breaking under repeated turnover. Its reported price tag of about $5 billion underlines the true ambition. Not a single stadium, but a long-life platform meant to perform at global event standards. SoFi Stadium stands as a mega-project achievement because it turns scale into a repeatable operating system, built to absorb crowds, weather, and constant scheduling pressure, and still deliver a controlled experience on demand. Seattle Link Light Rail. What does it take to keep a fast-growing region moving when highways saturate, widening roads becomes politically and physically costly, and just drive turns into a daily gamble? Seattle's Link Light Rail is the structural answer, a regional rail spine designed to replace traffic uncertainty with scheduled, repeatable movement that does not depend on roadway luck. Today, the system already operates at city scale, about 89 kilometers with 48 stations, which is enough to function as a true backbone rather than a single showcase line. Its value comes from alignment choices that separate trains from congestion using a mix of tunnels, elevated guideways, and dedicated right-of-way, so travel time stays stable even when surface streets collapse. That stability changes behavior. Stations become predictable exchange points where buses, walking access, and local trips can feed into one high-capacity corridor instead of duplicating parallel car routes. The system's real engineering is operational discipline, power, signaling, maintenance windows, and incident response, because reliability is what makes riders trust the schedule enough to reorganize daily life around it. And when the schedule becomes trustworthy, The payoff is not only faster trips, but a region that becomes easier to plan. Commuting becomes less variable, event crowds are more manageable, and growth can cluster around access. But the trade-off arrives in the long horizon, because expanding rail through dense neighborhoods and complex crossings is slow, expensive, and publicly visible when timelines slip. Recent reporting on the delayed Cross-Lake connection underscores that mega-project transit is rarely one opening day. It is a sequence of partial wins that only becomes whole after years of coordination and fixes. The long-range plan is to more than double the network to about 187 kilometers, which signals the true intent. Not a single line, but a metropolitan operating system. Link stands as a major infrastructure project because it makes movement more routine and less risky for everyday life, while demanding sustained funding, patient construction, and rigorous operations to keep that promise real. Waldorf Astoria, Miami. Across downtown Miami, a tower in progress is rising as a carefully staged stack of glass volumes, designed to read like a vertical district rather than a single, uninterrupted shaft. Waldorf Astoria, Miami's concept is architectural choreography, offset blocks that step upward, creating a skyline signature that feels assembled, not simply extruded. The underlying move is pressure relief through concentration, packing hotel, residences, and daily services into one address so growth can climb instead of spreading outward across limited ground. Planned at roughly 100 floors, it is positioned as Miami's first super tall, which means the design has to prove not only beauty, but stability and operability at exceptional height. That is why the most important design is often invisible. Life safety strategy, vertical transportation, and building systems engineered to remain predictable in coastal wind, heat, and constant daily use. The build itself is part of the story, still under construction, with completion targeted for 2028. A long horizon timeline that reflects how super talls are delivered through sequencing, logistics, and quality control rather than a single dramatic reveal. As the structure climbs, each completed section effectively locks in the tower's final identity, because the stacked form must align precisely for both aesthetics and structural performance. As a mega project, Waldorf Astoria Miami matters because it turns the act of building itself into a statement, showing how the city is choosing vertical density, engineered systems, and landmark design as its next chapter. Gordie Howe International Brigade. What does it take to add a new international crossing where every delay has an economic cost, and where security, capacity, and reliability all have to improve at the same time? The Gordie Howe International Bridge is being built between Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario, to add crossing redundancy, expand border processing capacity, and create direct highway-to-highway connectivity for people and freight. Instead of treating the bridge as a single object, the project functions as a full border system. The span, new ports of entry on both sides, and the connecting road networks that make the crossing usable at scale. Its cable-stayed main span is about 853 meters, designed to be the longest cable-stayed main span in North America, and it is planned with no piers in the water to reduce in-river impacts and keep navigation clear. Overall, the bridge is about 2.5 kilometers long, with approach structures on each side that feed directly into the border plazas, rather than dumping traffic into local streets. That system-first logic is the real mega-project move. It makes the crossing less dependent on luck at choke points by organizing traffic, inspections, and flow as one coordinated machine. The design also includes a multi-use path for pedestrians and cyclists, expanding the crossing beyond vehicles and tying the bridge into broader trail connectivity. On schedule and status, it is still under construction. Construction has been described as expected to complete in late 2025, with opening to traffic expected in early 2026 after final systems testing, and recent regional reporting has echoed the early 2026 expectation. That timeline highlights the trade-off these projects always carry. The benefit is long-term reliability, but the cost is years of staged construction, coordination, and commissioning before the public gets the routine experience. In the end, the Gordie Howe International Bridge matters because it turns a high-stakes border bottleneck into more predictable daily infrastructure, reducing friction for trade and travel by redesigning the crossing as a complete, modern system. A single glass prism rises from a hardened base where memory and security share the same footprint, and the skyline feels both rebuilt and redecided. One World Trade Center anchors Lower Manhattan as an office and broadcast tower whose symbolic height reaches about 541 meters, turning scale into a statement of permanence. Its geometry deliberately evolves from a square base into a faceted shaft and up into a broadcast mast, a form meant to stay stable in wind while reading as one continuous, disciplined silhouette. For visitors, the experience is engineered as a controlled ascent. The SkyPod elevators climb 102 floors in about 47 seconds, so the city's complexity collapses into a single vertical move. Before the views arrive, the route funnels into room 8D, a pre-show theater moment that sets the emotional and historical frame before the glass ever does the talking. Inside room 8D, the media is doing a practical job, not decoration. It compresses the skylines past and present into one breath, so the reveal feels structured rather than accidental. That same structured mindset shows up in the building's defensive base, a design choice that has drawn commentary because it makes resilience visible and slightly austere at street level. As a megaproject, One World Trade Center works because it is not only a landmark, but an operating system, built to hold daily work, mass visitation, and broadcast function inside a single, continuously reliable vertical address. The Grand Mosque of Mecca. What does it take to keep a sacred space functioning when the demand is not thousands, but crowds that can swell into the millions within a single day? At the Grand Mosque in Mecca, the Kaaba sits at the center, and everything around it is engineered to guide movement, reduce friction, and prevent a sacred ritual from becoming uncontrolled pressure. The site spans about 356,000 square meters, so it operates less like a single building and more like a managed district with layered circulation. Here, architecture is really operations, how people enter, disperse, converge, and repeat the same routes safely while the flow never truly stops. Authorities have highlighted that the open area around the Kaaba can accommodate about 107,000 pilgrims per hour for circumambulation, which shows how the project treats crowd movement as measurable capacity, not improvisation. That scale demands constant coordination, signage, timing, staffed control points, and infrastructure that can absorb surges without turning worship into waiting or anxiety. And because the environment is harsh, comfort systems, shade, water access, cooling strategies, and maintenance routines become part of the worship experience, even when they remain mostly invisible. The mosque's modern form is also the product of repeated expansion and renewal, because the site has to keep adapting to rising pilgrim volumes without losing functional clarity. Recent development initiatives around the Grand Mosque underscore that the surrounding precinct is still being reshaped to improve access and increase capacity, which also brings ongoing debate about change versus continuity. The Grand Mosque of Mecca stands as a true mega-project because it converts spiritual centrality into daily reliability, proving that at the highest human scale, the hardest structure to build is controlled flow. Fast. In the hills of Guizhou, fast is built for a single, modern problem. The universe speaks softly, and most of its signals vanish into noise before we ever notice. Instead of chasing spectacle, the project uses a natural limestone basin to hold a radio telescope so large it becomes a piece of ground infrastructure, not a conventional building. With a reflector about 500 meters across, its advantage is simple and ruthless. More collecting area means fainter signals can be pulled into usable data. But size alone is not enough, so the system relies on controlled geometry, with the surface and the receiver arranged to aim without moving an entire mountain of structure. What keeps it credible is not the opening moment, but repeatable performance, calibration, monitoring, and steady operation that protects sensitivity over years. The surrounding environment matters just as much because radio interference can overwhelm the instrument, so the project depends on enforced quiet and disciplined site management. When it works, the payoff is not a view, but a capability, tracking distant sources, finding new radio events, and turning deep space signals into measurable patterns. FAST stands as a mega project in science because it converts a remote landscape into a precision listening machine at planetary scale, proving that the hardest material to engineer is silence. Yangshan Deepwater Port. When the world's biggest container ships need deep water, but a city's natural shoreline is too shallow, how do you build a port that stays fast, predictable, and scalable? Yangshan Deepwater Port is Shanghai's offshore answer, built out on joined islands and reclaimed ground so the ocean's depth becomes usable logistics instead of a geographic limitation. The entire concept depends on connection, and the Donghai Bridge, about 32.5 kilometers long, turns an open sea facility into something trucks and schedules can actually reach every day. Once the port is reachable, the real story becomes throughput, where automation and tight coordination let the terminals behave less like docks and more like an industrial processing line that never truly stops. That operational discipline is what makes the payoff feel immediate. Bigger ships can be handled offshore, congestion pressure shifts away from cramped inner-city waterfronts, and routing becomes more dependable for regional trade. But the trade-off is built into the location because typhoon disruptions and offshore exposure can suspend operations and even force bridge closures, reminding everyone that reliability here is an active fight against weather, not a default setting. Yangshan stands as a mega-project because it turns open sea into controlled infrastructure, making global shipping feel routine, while demanding constant systems thinking to keep the ocean's risk from reasserting itself. The sphere. A perfect curve interrupts the strip's hard grid, and the skyline suddenly feels reorganized around a single object with its own gravity. The sphere rises about 112 meters high, but from above the height is not the point. The point is how one continuous surface can dominate a district that is otherwise all edges, corners, and straight lines. With a diameter of roughly 157 meters, it forces the view to widen until streets and parking lots flatten into geometry, and the city starts reading like an engineered diagram. As the camera arcs around it, the building stops behaving like a venue and starts behaving like a signal, because the exterior is not a facade in the traditional sense. It is a living skin designed to broadcast identity at urban scale. When the LED surface comes alive, the images do not sit on the structure so much as they inhabit it, sliding across the curvature in a way that makes light feel physical and the skyline feel temporarily rewritten. The more the view moves, the more the contrast sharpens. Everything around it remains rigid and rectangular, while this one object stays perfectly constant, letting each new visual scene read with unusual clarity. From this angle, the sphere is a mega-project because it turns a city landmark into programmable architecture, something that can change the way the entire strip is perceived without moving a single wall. Transfagarasin Highway. A ribbon of asphalt climbs into cloud and stone, folding back on itself in tight curves until the mountains stop feeling like scenery and start feeling like a gate. Romania's Transfagarasan was carved across the southern Carpathians as a strategic route in the early 1970s, then officially opened in 1974 as a statement of control over terrain. Near its crest, the road reaches about 2,042 meters, where thin air, sudden fog, and steep drops force every design choice to serve stability before beauty. The engineering logic is straightforward but demanding. When slopes leave no gentle option, the route must be stitched together with cut rock, viaducts, and tunnels that keep the line moving across broken ground. Because the alpine climate refuses to negotiate, the road is typically closed through the snow season, which quietly reminds drivers that access here is conditional, not guaranteed. Its construction story carries a harder edge as well, with sources noting heavy use of blasting and a human cost that remains part of the road's long shadow, even as exact accounts differ. On the surface, the experience is cinematic: hairpins, long sight lines, and sudden reveals. Yet the real sensation is logistical. A route that turns what would be a slow mountain detour into a single, continuous crossing. The same beauty also demands discipline, because weather shifts quickly, rockfall risk is real, and traffic can bottleneck where viewpoints tempt people to stop without planning. That is the trade-off megaprojects often carry in mountains. Access and tourism rise, but maintenance and safety management become permanent responsibilities rather than occasional tasks. Transfiguration stands as a megaproject not because it is merely scenic, but because it compresses harsh geography into usable connection, while never letting anyone forget what it costs to keep that connection open. Pinglu Canal. How do you give an inland economy a direct path to the sea when the natural coastline is shallow and the existing river route forces long, indirect logistics? Pinglu Canal is Guangxi's answer, now under construction as a river-to-sea link running from the Shijin Reservoir area on the Yu River near Hangzhou down toward Qinzhou and the Beibu Gulf. Strategically, it is framed as backbone infrastructure for the new international land-sea trade corridor, meant to make southwest and inland supply chains feel closer to maritime routes without depending on a single congested outlet. At about 134 kilometers long, the canal is not a local shortcut so much as a new logistics geometry, an engineered corridor that reassigns where coastal access begins. Design targets call for handling vessels up to 5,000 tons, using lock and channel control to manage elevation and flow, so cargo can move in a stable, repeatable pattern rather than in seasonal improvisation. What makes it feel like a true megaproject is the systems thinking behind it. The canal has to coordinate water behavior, navigation safety, and construction through complex terrain, so the route remains dependable long after the first opening. If it performs as intended, the payoff is routine predictability, shorter shipping paths, lower friction for regional trade, and less logistical uncertainty when schedules matter more than headlines. Pinglu Canal stands out because it turns geography into an engineered choice, making ocean access feel operational for the interior, while committing the region to long-horizon operation, maintenance, and environmental management that only projects of this scale can justify. Kashagan oil field. What does it take to pull oil out of a sea that is shallow, winter-hard, and mechanically unforgiving, where nature compresses the work season and punishes every weak link? Kashagan sits offshore in the northern Caspian, and it is often described as one of the biggest oil discoveries of recent decades, which is why expectations have always been global in scale. The catch is underground. The reservoir lies more than 4,200 meters down, where high pressure and sour fluids turn basic materials and seals into long-term design problems. So the project behaves less like a single platform and more like a stitched system. Offshore facilities feeding onshore processing with tight controls to keep safety and corrosion risk from dictating the schedule. In the North Caspian, winter is not background. Contractors have documented short construction windows and the need for protection against ice forces, which pushes engineering toward defensive, systems-first decisions. That fragility showed up early, when initial output was followed by pipeline leaks linked to the corrosive, sulfur-rich gas environment. Proof that at this scale, chemistry can stop a mega project as effectively as weather. After major replacement and recovery work, production resumed later, and the field's story shifted from can it start to can it stay stable, which is a harder question for any offshore system. From there, the real work is continuous: monitoring, maintenance discipline, and operational rules that keep output predictable, even when the sea and the reservoir refuse to cooperate. Public reporting has also tracked the long-tail trade-offs around Kashagan, including recurring cost and contract tensions, reminding everyone that mega-project risk does not end when construction ends. Kashagan matters as a mega-project because it turns a hostile offshore basin into functioning export infrastructure, making supply feel routine while demanding constant technical rigor to keep corrosion, ice, and operational complexity from taking control back. Valencia, City of Arts, Sciences. A white, bone-like skyline rises from mirror-still pools, and from above it looks less like a district of buildings than a city rehearsing the future in plain daylight. Valencia's City of Arts and Sciences was set into the former Turia riverbed, using a reclaimed urban corridor to turn empty space into a cultural engine rather than a traffic scar. The design leans on repetition, curves, ribs, and long, bright surfaces, so the complex reads as one continuous organism, with water acting like a frame that doubles every silhouette. That visual purity is also the hidden pressure point, Because the cleaner the surfaces look, the more the project depends on constant upkeep to keep weathering, staining, and small failures from becoming the headline. Public reporting has long tied the site's story to its price, with total costs often cited around 1.2 billion euros, which is the trade-off behind a landmark that aims to operate as both museum district and global postcard. Even so, the payoff is real at city scale. The complex concentrates tourism, events, and public space into one destination, making Valencia feel larger and more legible to visitors without expanding the city outward. City of Arts and Sciences stands as a mega project because it converts architectural ambition into a working civic magnet. Beautiful, demanding, and only as successful as the operational discipline that keeps the future-looking image intact. A city's real heartbeat is not its skyline, but the unseen choreography of arrivals and departures that has to stay stable, even when everything else is crowded. John F. Kennedy International Airport is New York's primary international gateway, built to keep long-distance movement reliable when the region's roads and rail corridors hit their limits. Today it operates with 5 active terminals linked by the AirTrain system, so the airport functions less like a single building and more like a coordinated district that has to keep flow legible. Port Authority redevelopment plans show that the airport is still being rebuilt in place, with the first gates of the new Terminal 1 and Terminal 6 scheduled to open in 2026, and new Terminal 1 opening in phases beginning in June 2026. That long horizon construction reflects the real constraint at hubs like this. You cannot stop the machine to rebuild it, so reliability has to be protected while the system is changing around live passengers. JFK stands as a mega project of everyday logistics because it turns global travel into routine operations, making movement predictable through constant coordination, staged expansion, and disciplined infrastructure management. Hoover Dam. In the American Southwest, the real danger is not only drought, but volatility. Years when the river can swing from sudden surge to long shortage, forcing communities to plan inside uncertainty. Hoover Dam was built to replace that uncertainty with control, storing the Colorado River so water can be released deliberately and predictably instead of arriving only when nature allows it. When it began operating in 1936, it shifted the region from reactive crisis management to planned supply, because wet season surges could be held back and dry seasons could be buffered by stored reserves. At about 221 meters tall, the structure's scale functions as a stability tool, creating a reservoir large enough to smooth extremes and reduce downstream flood pressure while supporting dependable deliveries. That same regulated flow supports hydropower generation, linking water management and electricity to a single operating discipline where timing and safety rules matter as much as raw capacity. The project's long life also shows the real price of control. Ecosystems and sediment behavior change, and the politics of allocation persist because demand keeps pressing on a finite system. Hoover Dam stands as a defining megaproject because it converted a volatile river into dependable daily infrastructure, making stability and long-term planning possible in an extreme landscape.